you can't be judgmental and pretend to be curious. Like people sniff that shit out. You know, you can't use your words. You can't say, I'm just asking. Like, why did you do that? I'm just
authentically.
Asking. Like, Butterscotch. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 497 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is December 6th, 22x4. Now, before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. And we got a nice big old fat single donation from LexZap, which comes with a message.
Ooh.
LexZap says, thanks again for great games and great audio laughs. I wish Crashlands 2 to be an amazing success.
Oh, thanks.
So, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We are cruising on this game. It is 1 billion loose ends that are rapidly being tied up right now.
We just finished another 50,000 words of translation.
Jeez.
Yep.
Which brings the total translated word count to about 105,000 words.
Still quite a bit to go.
It's not done.
Yeah, and so we kind of this phased approach when it comes to that kind of stuff, where it's like as we're working on things like quests and stuff, they get marked as being in a draft state. So we can keep working on them, but they're not hooked up to our localization pipeline until we mark them as done, right? And so we have a pretty big volume of quests towards the end of the game that we're still, cinching up and getting them all ready for that. So I'm not quite sure how many words it'll be total in the end, but
it's already basically double the first game. So
it's already double.
That's a lot. And
it's going to be more.
There was a lot of when I got the invoice from our localization company. Put the fear of God in me when I saw the number on there. But
yeah, they're big numbers.
I mean, it was what we expected it to be given their estimates and our like.
Well, it's one thing to estimate it and then another one to get a bill for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh boy. It's a lot.
Yeah, and like when you're translating it once, it's like, yeah, I get, it's like, what is it, 15 cents a word or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're just thinking about one language, you're like, okay, like that's a lot. It's a lot of money, but like it opens up a new market and stuff like that. But when you translate it into like 8 languages at the same time, and then you get the bill that's 8 times that amount, it's there's a sticker shock on it. Mm-hmm. We were talking about this a while back. I'm like, I kind of miss the days when we didn't even have the option to think about this because we only had like $500 in the bank. I mean, we had other problems, but staring down the barrel of that bill, it's something that it's still new to us.
Well, yeah, it is that funny thing, right? Because like in early dev or early in the business, we had time but no money. We didn't have a lot of time, but we had time and no money. So we could do things if we could find a way to make time for them, right? But we couldn't do things if they required money, and we couldn't make an exchange. We couldn't say, well, we can't put in the time, but we got some money, so let's put in the money. So we just had to choose what we could do. And
honestly, like most cool things come from having a lot of time and not a lot of money, because you have to be really scrappy.
Yeah,
you got to be really clever. Like as you end up with more of one and less of, like, as you end up with more money and less time, then your problem solving tends to become very boring and uninspired.
But it is.
I'll just throw some money at it.
But it's still, of course, very limiting to not have any money, right? Because your options
it's not quite. It's certainly not. It's certainly not better to have no money.
Well, I would say it's weirdly, it's limiting in either direction. And if you have a lot of time and a lot of money, that's where nothing happens, weirdly.
Yeah. But not due to limitation.
No, because there's no pressure.
Like,
there's
due
no
to your own not fucking around enough and then finding out too much, or maybe that's the wrong way to say that. But, and that's been that kind of an interesting thing we've had with like Crashlands 2 dev and is like, we kind of we're taking all the time we want to get the game done, right? Which is great because it's going to be exactly the game we want it to be, right? And there were a few moments where we were like, oh shit, we're going to be running out of money. And then we managed to get things turned around and working through some business deals and stuff. And so we got to make the game that we really wanted it to be. And so you can see kind of both sides. Like we still have to get it out though. It's still extremely expensive to make it. And so we're actually in that space where Crashlands 2 is kind of being finished up as if there's not money involved, right? Because
there won't be.
But we still have to. So a lot of like, at least for me, the primary motivator for Crashlands 2 is I just want to I'm just tired. That's the primary motivator for getting the game out.
It's been 4 years.
It's been so long, right?
It's been a whole ass college degree working on this game.
Yeah.
Which, as we've talked about in the past, like it's a lot of like tech development, tools development, a lot of learning and stuff like that. But still, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's all worth doing, right? But I think that's the interesting thing now is we have, because now that we're leading up to the launch and we have all these questions of like, do we do an ad spend? Do we pay X person to do Y, right? Do we like, what are the things that do we pay to be part of this festival so that our trailer gets top placement in the thing? And like there's no end of things that once you have enough financial success from running the game studio, there's no end of things where you can throw money in, right? And it's a fucking black hole.
And you can always justify it because there's always just in case kind of a.
Yep. Yeah, and the thing is, like, in the act, this is why, like, if you're a AAA studio with $100 million marketing budget, then it kind of doesn't matter that you threw $20,000 at this thing that didn't really work and whatever, because you're going for this huge aggregate effect by just sheer brute force. It's not about quality. It's not about
it's hedging. It's saying like if the game, let's say you're trying to release a game and you have the money to do all these big marketing campaigns, right? If the game doesn't do well and you didn't do those things, then you're like, we left that on the table, So if you do them all and the game doesn't do well, you're like, well, we did everything we could, right? Even though apparently what you did didn't matter, right? It's weird, like it's like a covering your ass kind of a thing. So I mean,
it's wild.
Yep. So we're cruising on Crashlands 2 stuff. We're getting a lot of the marketing stuff wrapped up. So a lot of the work with these past few weeks has gone into iterating over the final trailer, which won't be out for some time still, because we got to strategically unveil.
We'll drop
this
it with
thing.
the actual with the hard release date, but that'll be coming sometime soon.
Soon TM.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about the trailer, just because after working on this game for 4 years and just kind of like being lost in the weeds, right? Because it's every day it's just like working on this quest, tweaking this thing, polishing this thing up, revising this UI.
Oh yeah, you're right up next to it, right? It's not even not even a tree in the forest. It's like a twig on a tree in the forest that you're working on any given day, right? So you got no sense of it at scale. Yeah.
And the trailer is supposed to be about vibes, and it's supposed to sort of convey, what does this game feel like? What is it like to be in this world and to experience this journey, right? And I gotta say, like, after watching the trailer, it's a short trailer. I mean, it's a minute 15 or something like that, because we gotta keep it tight. And the amount of stuff that's in this trailer and just the sheer variety of set pieces and scenes and like creatures and combat scenes and things that are happening and characters and places. And it's just like, I was telling Adam and Sam, it took me back to back in 2004. I remember seeing on like GameSpot or some, website, the World of Warcraft E3 trailer from 2004, which was a 5-minute long video, by the way. Things were different back then.
Yeah. You had some time,
And that trailer didn't have any voiceover or anything. It was literally just moving from place to place in the world and just showing all these different regions and all these like cities and like characters fighting creatures and cool scenes and it was just that for 5 minutes, which gave this sense of like the world is really, really big. Like there's just a lot of stuff in there.
Well, and they were selling you the world part of World of Warcraft. Right?
It was the world, yeah. And I was like, I was kind of getting that vibe from our Crashlands 2 trailer, where it's like it just keeps going. Like it just keeps showing you more and more shit. And so I'm really excited for people to see it, but that feeling of kind of like being able to zoom out and like try to, because the trailer's meant for people who don't know the game, right? Is to kind of show that stuff. And so for me personally, it kind of helped me to kind of get out of the weeds a little bit and like appreciate what we've been building, you know, from a higher level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the goal with any of these. We talk a lot about marketing on the podcast, right? And errors we've made in the past with focusing too much on the specifics or on like the bullets, you know, the feature list, and not being able to figure out how exactly to convey that. Again, that it's not the truth on a mechanical level of what the player is experiencing necessarily that you're trying to do in marketing a game. It's trying to capture that bigger thing about the whole game experience that, you know, if you sit down and play this thing, what you're going to kind of walk away with. And it is really hard to do that, like to somehow, because you have to illustrate that via showing, you know, mechanical moments in the game. And so it's a really interesting, like, it's just an interesting challenge, right? It's the same thing to me as like painting or drawing something where it's like you make the illusion of a three-dimensional space with a bunch of lines on a 2D plane. They are not, you're not making the thing out of the parts that it's actually made of. You know what I mean? Like you have to somehow leap across that gap. And I think it'll be really good.
But I also think there's a interesting evolution here in like our ability to market stuff that I think is worth noting, which is back if you go back and watch the first Crashlands trailer, our release trailer for Crashlands, we had the voiceover on there. But like Sam was saying, it was very much like us describing all the stuff. Right. Like it has this many recipes and like, if, you know, it starts out, if you like words and reading them, then, you know, prepare to experience the story of a lifetime.
I think, which I still think is a good disclaimer, frankly, for the game, because, you know.
There are words and you've got to read them.
Discussed.
Which is true of life. So if you don't like words and reading them, you know, maybe take a step back and reevaluate that opinion. But we list like, you have infinite inventory and you can like build like your finger painting and build.
It's all of the bullets, all of the bullet points.
And what I think is interesting is that at the time, the graphical fidelity of our games was not what it is now.
Correct.
It was much harder for us to sell the game just on vibes because it was very much gameplay first. Like
you mean top to bottom, it was gameplay first. Even from an art standpoint, it was gameplay first.
Yeah. Like the way that we made the art was even gameplay first because you know Sam would pump out an asset and it was like, all right, done, on to the next one. You're like, got to get it in there so that we can like hook it up and play with it, right? And with Crashlands 2, we spent so much time iterating on the visuals. So much time. Like we rebuilt our whole pipeline and animation style and everything. We even added an artist, you know, worked on shaders and post-processing effects and color grading and like all this stuff to the point where it just doesn't feel like we need to do that in the trailer anymore. Like we don't need to try to convince you with our words of what it's going to be like to play the game.
Because you can see it.
Because you can see it now, you know?
I think it's also to the variety of stuff that you can do because it's the visuals now sell themselves, right? But also like watching through the trailer, the variety of like ways you interact with stuff and stuff that happens that all kind of feels actually meaningfully different is the other part of that, right? Because if we go back to the original, like it is still mostly like the sameness is more palpable, you know, as you're going about doing combat, doing harvesting, building stuff, because those three things, that's it, right? And there's not really that much variation in those things. There is visually, but then that's limited by the visuals, right? And so with Crashlands 2, we have both of those things together, which is this wider variety of stuff. Because like if you're watching this new trailer, when we get to show it to you, when you're watching it, you're just gonna see like all these different animations happening because Flux can do
stuff,
more kinds of things, right? And you're just gonna see more kinds of stuff. And I think those two things work together to make it so we can just really put together a trailer that's like, yeah, this thing just kind of stands on its own, you know?
Yeah, and it's like we were talking a while back in one of our prior episodes about Half-Life and Half-Life 2, and Mike, who's one of our internal QA testers, one of our part-time QA testers, he gave probably the biggest compliment I've ever gotten for any of the games I've ever worked on. Was he said that the jump from Crashlands to Crashlands 2 feels like the jump from Half-Life to Half-Life 2.
That's good.
I was like, well,
and it does.
All right. I hope it resonates with people, you know. But I think the trailer, I think it does a pretty good job. So I'm excited to get that out there and see what the response is. And I think we got some new stuff on our Steam page as well.
We did a bunch of
go check out.
Since we were able to finalize a number of kind of later game assets. It's one of the things we've been working on. Like basically, we have to gray box all this. So we talked about kind of how we've been building out that final 2/3 of the game since the mantle was completed, the first act was completed, and so much of that is just rapidly gray boxing stuff. And so what I mean by that is either myself or our artist Anne will be literally making what is essentially the shape of the finished asset, the drawing of the finished asset, but not bothering to do the rendering because it just saves you an extra like 45 minutes per thing, right? So one of the things we were waiting on was like, okay, there's a few creatures and a few armor sets toward the back half of the game that until we have them dialed in and actually rendered, there's no point in bothering with this the store page refreshes, the GIF refreshes, all this stuff, because we're still going to be stuck just showing more of the green, blue mantle stuff that you've already seen before. So I was really excited this last couple weeks then to.
Well, it's weird because like let's say like 90% of the stuff is rendered and done, which actually kind of has been the case. And so, but the problem is like if you're fighting, if you're in this like fully rendered beautiful space, it has like terrain and like blah blah blah, and then this one thing, this creature comes running in, but it's just a picture of a creature that's just bouncing around, right? Then it's like, well, we can't really use that. So even though almost every single thing is done, if not everything is done, we can't use it for any marketing at all.
And this is why you see this with the old joke about like E3 stuff is all of the smoke and mirrors that's happening where the dev team has to go build like essentially a marketable thing,
a fake version of
the thing for a temporary purpose, right? Because the reality is that like if you just were building in a cave and you didn't have to show it to anybody until it was done, the build order is very different than if you along the way are trying to actually make sure people know about it, can get excited about it, whatever.
So this is
because practically nothing is done until all of it's done, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's the idea of the vertical slice versus the horizontal slice. So like the vertical slice is, if you think about a timeline of playing through the game, right? Like first hour, second hour, third hour, that's the horizontal axis, right? So your vertical slice is you're saying like, okay, we're gonna say that like everything in that first hour, every single thing is completely done. Everything the player can see and do, everywhere they can go, totally finished, right? So that's a vertical slice.
Which is basically like that's what the Crashlands 2 demo was, right? It was
it was a vertical slice of the first like couple hours of the game. And then the horizontal slice is saying like, okay, you'll be able to play through the entire game and like start to finish, but most of what you see won't actually be the finished version of it, and we'll be iterating on that stuff, right? So in a way, like Crashlands 2 has been largely a horizontal slice.
Yes. Because in reality, time, to make sure that you know that the game is going to work, you have to build the horizontal slice, right? Like you can, in other words, like the vertical slice is like you can test if short-term gameplay works, right? But
which makes sense to do for the beginning
at the start
of a game,
100%, and to know that like, okay, this is actually fun. It's fun to play in the moment. But then the question of like, is it fun to play after 30 hours? That's a very fucking different question. And it turns out you got to build, I don't know, the rest of the spine of the thing. Yeah.
Well, it's tough to evaluate too, because so for example, like when we built out the husk, which is the entire, like the second biome, that was our first time just like then moving from that vertical slice mode into the horizontal slice mode. Where it's like, okay, we're going to build out all the mechanics and build out everything without art. And there, like some things will have art, but most things won't. And there were times where it's kind of like difficult to evaluate how things were feeling, because like, let's say you've got, 50 different crafting components that drop from resources. But we just have like placeholder images for a lot of them, and a lot of them are reused placeholder images from other icons. Things or whatever. They're just like generic icons for things. And so then you go to your crafting menu and it's like, okay, I've got like 6 different sword icons because there's all these different types of weapons, right? And then like their components are using similar icons, but they're different items. And it starts to hit a point where it's like, okay, we actually can't evaluate this anymore until we get at least a little bit of art in here, right? And so then we would kind of like do that.
But you want to do that, but at the same time, it's like the priority is also on getting the art put into other stuff. Like there's art happening, right? It's like the resources all in the world all have art. But
so it's all about prioritizing and kind of like moving your art time around.
And it's so tricky, right?
Yeah, you don't build horizontally or vertically, right? You kind of build both and then prioritize one or the other depending on.
Yeah, we just call it the diagonal slice, right? It's like you kind of just you play the game, and then as you run into things that that, like we're saying, are hard to evaluate because of some missing piece. And it's like, all right, so let's focus on that piece so that you can evaluate it and answer questions. And then once you can answer that, then you can kind of reprioritize.
And then bringing that back to the marketing side of things, which I would think of marketing as anything you want to make public, whether it's like public or like show to a publisher or business partner, whatever, right? While you're in development, right? Then I would think of that as kind of marketing. Then that is where that conflict comes in, is because for a given kind of game, sort of multiplied by the specifics of the team that's making it, right? There's going to be a sort of ideal way that this stuff unfolds, right? Of how the iteration happens, how much gets built, you know, sort of vertically versus horizontally, how those two things interact. And to actually make the game, there's going to be kind of some, you know, magic sauce of like what's best, right?
It's a ratio, it's a little ratio thing. It's like, oh yeah, we go like 1/3. It's like a stair step. How big are your stairs? You know, we go over like a little bit, and then we go up a lot. You know, or whatever the fuck as far as horizontal for sure.
And I won't say that like that's just a thing that we even know, right? That's something that you're constantly working out as you're trying to find the best way.
At different phases of dev.
Different phases of dev are different as the capabilities of the team change, as people's, you know, external responsibilities change. As things are happening, you're constantly trying to adapt. But all of it, the idea is that you're adapting in service to getting this fucking game made, right? Mm-hmm. And so the marketing problem is that only like you have to meet the audience correctly, right? Yes. And that is disconnected from the realities of what it means to make the game, right? And so if you're talking to a veteran publisher who is coming to you in like good faith, has seen 1 million games, right? And is evaluating like team capability and able to like look at what's being made in any state and be like, I see what's going on here. I can kind of
see where this is going. I get the idea.
Yeah. Then that kind of a person, you can basically hand off what you're doing, right? And be like, yeah,
you can be like, I'm 1 week in, and here's what we got, and
explain the difference, and you can explain the differences of like where it is versus where it's going, and they can get it, and they can like vibes based, just basically like, okay, cool, I'm going to decide if I'm going to fund you or not, right? That's like your almost never happens best case scenario, right?
But because publishers rarely are actually that familiar with the internal production of a game,
correct?
In that way, or you know, because like for example, we worked on this one game for 4 years, right? Overall, we've only published like 6 games, and it's with the same people largely, right? And so we don't have that diverse of an experience in different approaches and styles of developing games and publishing them, right? And so even if we became a publisher and somebody came to us and they're like, all right, here's what I have, like we would have a lot of questions that we would ask to try to evaluate, but we wouldn't know. Like we wouldn't know whether or not this team is really capable of pulling this thing off or.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the primary basis would be, what have you published before as a team, and seeing the quality of that thing.
Can you see something through? And
and then
how do you think about problems?
Yeah, and then looking at and seeing if our tastes match and that kind of stuff, right? And it wouldn't really be about the current project at all, except for very loosely, right?
Yeah, but I think to your point, like the marketing request basically becomes it's a vertical challenge, right?
Yeah, the request is basically, no matter how you're doing dev, somehow change it so that we go
to get us some vertical slices,
so that we can capture moments, capture video, capture snapshots, create a slide deck even or whatever. Because like that vertical slice doesn't even have to actually be in the game, like we're talking about with demos and stuff. Nope. But it could also be like if you've got a map editor in your game, that's how you compose it. You can basically construct a scene that doesn't exist in the game, only consisting of parts that are fully done, right? So that you can like put it. And honestly, that's the thing that we do. That's the thing that we do for screenshots and stuff when we're not making something that it doesn't matter that specifically doesn't exist with that particular arrangement, right? Then we'll say like, oh shit, this thing isn't done yet. So like go rip out the part that's not done, replace it with something else, and then we'll take a screenshot of that, right? But each time you do this, you're basically saying like, okay, disconnect from dev, right? Disconnect from production and dev and how this has to go, and then put some time into figuring out how do we do this completely other thing, right? And it's just an enormous, like frustrating challenge every time that happens, but especially depending on who you're trying to convey something to. So in the case of like all these assets we're talking about, this is for the public, and the public needs to see done fucking stuff, right? That's the only
you can't because you can't rely on expertise regarding like what this could be like.
Imagine how good this will be eventually. No.
You gotta already. It's gonna so like when you're trying to sell to the public, you got to show them stuff that's already done. So you basically have to like wait until the game is done, or if you have the time and resources to invest in that like demo thing, whatever it is, that is just a full accurate representation. This is where people run into trouble, like with No Man's Sky and these other things, right? Where you make the thing that you believe, hopefully, honestly, is truly representative of what the end product is going to be. But when you have to do it that early.
Yeah, you're doing it before it's done. So,
you're doing it before it's done. It can't actually be what it is.
I will say that there's also something interesting that's been happening lately, I think, with especially with indie game development, because there's kind of this weird bifurcation that's going on in the games industry where AAA games just keep getting bigger and bigger, more and more expensive.
They're all live service.
They have to be live service because if they cost $500 million to make, then they have to make $500 million, which means you just jam them full of microtransactions, right? And so the AAA game space is kind of collapsing in on itself in sort of like a black hole of just like live service microtransaction games because they're so expensive. And then so the indie space, though, there's a lot of interesting things going on, and because of tools like Unity and Unreal and Godot and Game Maker, like there's so many ways to make good looking games that there's this, like, I don't know if you guys have seen, there's like YouTube videos of like, oh yeah, I made my first game ever in Unreal Engine in 2 weeks, like here's a video of it. And it looks amazing, actually. Like people can make games now that look so fucking good, even if they have basically no background in any of this. But that doesn't mean that it's a good game, right?
Yeah.
And so
the converse is also true, is people can make games that don't look that good because of tools,
but they're incredible,
but that are actually good because they can be fleshed out. Yeah, but both are happening at the same time in the indie space.
Yeah, so I am a little worried that like over time there's like, well, I mean it's probably a good thing, but like there's like a growing skepticism of like people showing off a game and saying like, oh, like I've been working on this game for the past year. Here's a clip of it. And it's going to look really, really cool. But it turns out it's, nothing, right? So like there is that kind of a risk as well of like, of over time, people kind of becoming more and more suspicious.
Well, and this is why, whether it's a games publisher or some kind of investor in any kind of business sort of context, right? This is why the smart ones, the only thing they really care about is who the team is and what they have,
what their track record
is. This is the reason for that. It's because nobody can predict if a product, a game, whatever, is actually going to be successful. You could look at it and be like,
get finished even.
but I think for this question of like, when people think that when a publisher is evaluating what they're making, that they're evaluating whether or not they can sell it, right?
It's partially
which is part of it. Absolutely.
It's true. It's true on the highest level, as in like genre, basically.
But it doesn't matter if they don't know if you can make it. Correct. And if they don't know if you can make it well, right? And so what a good investor, which is what a publisher is, right? They're going to care first and foremost, like, do you have a track record? And is the quality in that track record what I could put my sort of, I'm willing to risk stuff on, right? And if so, then if I like the pitch for the new thing and think I could maybe sell it, then that's where the yes comes from, right? Because everything else, the likelihood of a thing getting done well enough, of it matching the taste of the person throwing money at it and so on, right, is like so low, which isn't about the person making it, right? It's that the risk is really high because there's no way to know. And the most likely outcome, most stuff doesn't get done. It's just the truth of it.
But
right?
I would say in a weird way, this applies differently in different contexts, right? So like if there's an indie team that's largely the same team that's making a game that's kind of like in the same rough area. So like, let's say like Supergiant, right? Like if Supergiant was like, we're going to make a first person shooter, I'd be like, well, I'm going to reserve judgment on that because I've never seen them make a 3D game and I've never seen them make a shooter before, right? Like they know how to make really, really good games. I know that, but I don't know if they can pull that off. And also, like, will they do it in a way that's like unique and interesting, right? I believe that they will, and I'm biased toward that. But like, if let's say like Blizzard comes out. and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be making the crafting survival game. My instinct would be like, I'm not going to buy that. Probably because it's free to play anyways, but also because their track record now over the past decade is just like, again, it's the AAA microtransaction, just like squeeze money out of everything, right? And so like depending on the structure of the team as well and how that changes over time, or like what happened with Kerbal Space Program 2, right? Like I was hyped for Kerbal Space Program 2, but then as I saw more and more news about what was happening with the company and how it actually wasn't, it was the same company, but not, and the same IP, but not the same people anymore working on it, then suddenly I'm like, I don't know about this. And
I think it depends.
It didn't turn out good.
It depends on metaphorically if you think or recognize that video game development is more like running a band than it is running a business, in the sense of like
that's the thing about like us. It's a startup is actually the unifying fact. Like a band is a startup, right? An indie game studio is a startup. It's about the scale, right? Because a company that's huge is already successful. Its parts are interchangeable. You can swap one CEO out with another. It doesn't fucking make a difference, right? At that point, once you just operate on sheer scale alone. Anything else operating at a small scale, it's who the people are.
Oh, I think it's about skin in the game, right? So like if you're like, so for us, we are really, really invested in Crashlands 2 being successful, because if it's not,
we're fucked.
We're fucked. but also like we are like what goes into this game is a reflection of us. So we don't want to put something out there that is low quality, that reflects poorly on us, right? Like we want to, and also it means something to us that like these past 4 years we spent working on this goes out into the world and means something to people. Right. Like we care about that. But if you're in a 500 person team and, you know, just every 2 weeks you get a missive from your team leader of like, okay, we need you to like make this new pair of elbow pads. Right. And like whether they look incredible or not doesn't fucking matter. And there's like 20 layers of bureaucracy that you got to go through to figure it out. And you don't even know whether it's going to end up in the game and blah, blah, blah. I think and you'll probably get fired the next week anyway because of layoffs. Then like, you don't care.
But I think that is the difference between like in the indie space versus the AAA space to me is like metaphorically what model the teams are operating under. Is it the band model where the people matter, right? You don't swap out the lead singer band. You know what I mean? You don't swap out like the fucking drummer of a band. It's
been
weird.
Tried. It rarely works.
It never works because it's not the fucking. the band is like an organism.
The band isn't an IP.
Correct.
It's people.
It's people.
You know.
So that's like the truthiness on smallest scale for video games. And then you go, but as you go up into the AAA space, you have to somehow transition from a band into, to Adam's point, basically like a scaled creative enterprise, which is a whole other fucking gambit. And there's a reason why, these game directors who have overseen multiple gigantic games that have done well. So you're talking like, Kojima and I guess Miyazaki from like the Dark Souls series and stuff. There's a reason why those people get paid just in a tremendous amount and get put on the next new gigantic project is because like how you somehow manage to still, do something creatively really, really well at that kind of enterprise scale where people might get a message from their boss like, hey, make this next set of elbow pads, but they can like fucking connect with it. They're like, oh yeah, that is important. Because it is. It can be.
Well, they're like a film director.
Exactly. It's a director.
You need somebody who's willing to put their name on it, who has a vision and they have skin in the game, right? Like if one of these people puts out a game and it's just universally panned as like just real fucking bad, that really reflects poorly on them, and it's going to be harder for them to get put in charge of the next big project, right? And so again, I do think it comes down to the more anonymized the development process is, the more you can count on things not going very well. Yeah, but yeah, because it is a point of pride of like people who are passionate about it, who care about what it is that they're putting out. They'll put their name on things. They'll put themselves out there. If they're hiding behind anonymity like that, then it's like whether it goes well or poorly, they can just move on. Mm-hmm.
I think the nuance there though is that's not really. I don't think that's how it works for the people who are making the stuff, right? I don't think it's the case that the people working AAA people aren't in game dev to get a paycheck because it pays poorly and is an extremely unstable work environment, right? They're in it because they love being involved and they love the part of the craft that they're involved in. So if you're like a AAA, like, yeah, like somebody's like, it's more likely that what your job is just to be assigned to do something. And then you do that thing. Right. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean
that's what I'm saying is it doesn't matter how much you personally care about the success of the game. Your ability to influence that gets limited by people.
That's just maybe don't. That's just a different thing, though. Yeah, so it's not about it's fair to say like it's kind of not so much about the quality of the stuff that individual people do, but it still is like when you're deciding to like invest in something, right? It's about the track record of the entity, and the entity is either a person, a small number of people, or a bureaucracy. Like I would think of like Blizzard, I would think of as like it's a bureaucracy as an entity.
It's a bureaucracy that accidentally makes games as a side effect.
Yeah, like it's a bureaucracy that generates games like sometimes, right?
Sometimes.
And it has, and there are people involved with it who, depending on their involvement with a particular thing, you can kind of put more or less they have like it's track records within track records, right? Because as an overarching entity, then you know that like Blizzard as an entity, they'll pull the plug on anything. Drop of a hat. You know that their C-suite is a corporate shit show, right? So you know that you can't trust
like they or Microsoft or Activision. Like there's so many layers where like so anybody can pull a plug on anything.
when all the locus of control is up there and you don't trust that spot, that doesn't matter what the track record is of the rest, right? And the same with like I saw a new Google product recently. Some AI thing, of course, and someone was like talking about how cool it was. And I saw it wasn't labeled as a Google thing. I just like it was in a .google domain. My response to that, I looked at it, I was like, oh, they're going to pull the plug on this in 6 months. I'm not even going to look at it.
Yeah, I'm not going to start looking at it.
And that's what. So that, but if I don't know the people involved. If I knew the people involved, I might have a different response to it, right?
You're saying regardless of the shape of the thing being made, the higher level structural part of the team, right? In this case,
it's about who's involved and what are their track records. And at some point, the who might be very anonymous. It might be a concept like a company, right?
But that's what I'm saying though. Is like for example, when they launched Stadia, they got some really good names in there.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't matter because it's Google because
it's Google. So it's not even about at a certain point, it's not about the people. It's about the structure under which they're operating, and then like how that structure creates outcomes.
This is where over the long term, you get stuff like I guess where Blizzard used to be, frankly, or where Valve is currently still, or say like Devolver, where you're able to put that higher level name on something, and it makes people trust
it's a mark of quality.
Anything underneath that layer, right?
Well, it's the idea of the Nintendo seal of quality back in the
it's the same
80s and 90s, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But as soon as you can't trust that thing anymore, which is like, so that's what happened with Google, right? I used to be a fan of Google because they made such cool shit, and it was fun to have this like internet first kind of a company, And that's not to say they weren't doing bad stuff also, because they were. I just didn't know as much about it at the time, But it's gotten to the point now where I don't trust anything they make, just like period, right? And you can't get that back. And Blizzard is the same deal, right?
Goodwill is accrued, drop by drop over.
Well, it's not even about time. I mean, Goodwill's a piece of it, right?
I mean, as in like, anything about this, like anything where it's like the value associated with even like our studio, right? If it takes 4 years to make a game, like it takes us a long time, right? Because we're not putting on a game every fucking year to build.
We don't have 3 other teams also making games.
Exactly. So it's like it takes us a long time then to put out a thing that allows us to build up more of that kind of momentum and more of that trust in the stuff we build. But it takes very little time to destroy all of it. You know what I mean? Like you just fuck it up real good one time. It's like with Diablo 3. It's like Diablo 3's real money auction house was for me. But
this is different though, right? Because like if Diablo 3 was just bad, that would be one thing, right? You'd be like, oh, I guess like maybe they've lost their edge, right? It wasn't bad.
But you might take malicious. A risk on the next one. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was cynical as fuck. Yeah. And that I think is the difference where like, if what you put out there expresses sort of like a resentment or something towards the people who are supposed to be your fans.
I think in a bigger organization like that, where you can feel the conflict between the people building the video game and the business layer responsible for, paying for it, when you could feel the conflict, which I feel like
feels gross.
It's always
don't
gross.
Want to touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem there is like, and there's a reason why, and then Diablo Immortal came out before Diablo 4, right? So it was like Diablo 3 had its real money auction house debacle, which did a lot of damage to Blizzard's reputation. And that aside from all of the other issues that the game had with like server problems and whatever else, always online, single player, etc. And then their next Diablo project was Diablo Immortal, which I think around launch cost about $500,000 to get a max level maxed out character or something like that of microtransactions. Literally just the most bald-faced, cynical fucking cash grab I've ever seen in the games industry. And then Diablo 4 comes, and I'm not even looking at it.
I play the shit about that. I guess the difference because it's like I think I looked at Diablo 4
because I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like I don't want to invest anymore in IPs that are coming from this company if this is the trajectory that they are likely to go down. Right. And so maybe it's a good game. Right. And like like Path of Exile 2 is coming out this upcoming weekend. And like a lot of people I know are super hyped about it. I don't know much about it. I'm going to maybe look into how things went with the original game and like what's the monetization model of it and stuff like that. It's supposed to be great. I love it. But like, yeah. So like if I want to play a game like Diablo, then my understanding is like Path of Exile is kind of that, kind of a thing. So maybe I'll check that out instead. But, like you burn a bridge and, well, it's gone now. Like you can't really cross back over it anymore. And so you got to be real careful with that stuff. Yep. But anyways, you guys want to get on some questions?
Yeah, that's a question too.
All right. Highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Dageki, who says, for the youngsters, biologically, not young at heart, for the youngsters in your life or the world at large, what kinds of lessons are you most keen to pass along? What beneficial life event or series of events would you most like them to experience?
I like the clarifier of not young at heart, because that definitely isn't how I was going to interpret the question. But
well, I think
I definitely won't. So
what I would say applies in all cases, which is so there's that scene in Ted Lasso where he's throwing darts. I don't know if you guys remember this scene.
Oh, it's a good
scene, where this dude just assumes that Ted sucks at darts and they have like a big, competition, blah, blah, blah. And Ted ends up winning the dart throwing challenge, spoilers. And he kind of like is monologuing as he's about to throw the final dart about how like this guy is just assumed all these things about him. And that's why he lost, because he didn't ask any questions. Yeah. So Ted wraps up this like there's like a Walt Whitman quote, I think, of like, be curious, not judgmental. And to me that kind of just wraps it up. We're like, just do stuff. Like get out there and just try things. Don't think like, oh, mate, this isn't for me. I don't know if I would like that thing or blah, blah. Like, yeah, you don't know. So just go fucking do it. Like join clubs. Like when in school, our parents, like we weren't big fans of this approach, but in retrospect, it was the right thing to do, which is they put us in everything, like swim team, art, music, band, choir. I was in like all these different sports and stuff. Made films.
We had the rule is basically like we got to choose which thing, but we had to be in a.
You got to do something.
Yeah.
And if you find out that you don't like it after giving it an honest shot, then that's fine. But don't just stop.
Well, it could be fine. In our case, we had to do it anyway until it was done because
because you don't quit.
You don't quit even if
there's which really that's not a lesson that I would pass on. Yeah. But it's this idea that like getting out there and getting a huge diversity of experiences and being curious about things instead of just presupposing that it's going to be stupid or that you're going to be bad at it or whatever. It builds up a really solid foundational baseline for you to pull from in so many other areas. Like this is where like wisdom comes from, right? It's like having a huge diversity of life experiences and experiencing lots of different things and meeting lots of people with different backgrounds that you can pull from those experiences and apply them in all kinds of unexpected ways going forward, So that would be my lesson is just.
I mean, I would take that one.
Just do stuff. Do as many different things as you can.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, there's actually, I agree with that, but also there's I'm taking the same concept, but I think in a more important spot, which is whether or not you're doing something. When other people are doing things or interested in things or describe something about how their life works or how they are, right? Also meet that with curiosity and no judgment. Because in the same way that you can learn tons of stuff about yourself, about the world, whatever, by actually going out and doing it, you just are going to be an infinitely better person. And also collect lots of good, interesting stuff by just meeting people where they're at. And when they're like, I love this band, never saying that band sucks, you know, that's like the dumb example of the whole thing, right? But like, never meet someone's joy with being a dick about it.
Because basically what happens, this is a cheat code, right? Like you can live a much longer life. And by that, I mean, you can experience more things by experiencing them through other people, right? Like if the sum total of your life is sort of like all the things that you've been able to experience, there's only so much time. Like you can't hang glide and parasail and become a guitar expert and speak 400 languages and be a pro. Like you can't do everything, right? There's just not enough time. But if you make friends with somebody who has a passion for something that you yourself haven't been able to experience, you can get a little glimpse into what that life is like and what kinds of experiences that person has had by just being curious and asking questions and listening to them and like sharing in that excitement that they have. And it's like you get a little nugget of extra, like an extra bit of life that you can like put in your pocket, you know, that you otherwise would never have gotten to experience.
Yeah, I think mine kind of comes along the same dimension, but is maybe just more on so I think all of them are curiosity oriented. It sounds like.
And you've got kids, so you've probably been thinking about this a lot of like, what kinds of things do you want to pass on? You know, what are the important things you want your kids to experience?
I think to your point, both your points, I think the thing just is curiosity. That's it. Because and I mean that, but I do mean in a sort of particular way, which is that you should generally try to ask more questions than you think you ought to,
and assume you have fewer answers than
answers, and also recognize that even the shape of the question you're asking, if you change the shape of the question, even if it's about the same thing, that you can sometimes find exactly what you're looking for, right? It's like, it's not just about asking questions, but it's even like asking questions about the questions. You know what I mean? It's getting at least 2 layers deep on that and doing more of that and listening to people, I think. Because it's very easy to hear everything that someone is saying and interpret it through a thing that you've already decided about how it works, even if you've asked a question, right? It's called a psychological shoot, right? Like a slide, which is like you're kind of already on a track if you frame a question in a particular way or think about someone in a particular way, such that when they're giving you answers, you can't actually understand what they're saying, even if you think you do. Right.
Well, yeah. And there's this like this idea that you rarely are just asking questions.
Correct.
Like questions often come with a presupposition of some kind of a bias or some kind of an answer. Right.
A question is a frame. So it always there's an angle on it every time. Right. And not in a nefarious way, but just like it's just the reality of like a question.
It always shapes
by
the
nature
kind of
is
answer
limited.
You can get.
Yes.
And then given the answer that was now already biased towards how you asked the question and what question you asked, it also shapes how you understand and interpret the answer.
Yes.
Both, right?
And in a weird way, like I think because of that fact, it can be very difficult for people to feel okay about asking questions or to feel okay being asked questions. So even like a basic example would be like, if I just like drove to Adam's house, you know, and then I say like, oh yeah, like I turned off on this one, you know, road and there was like a bunch of construction, you know, and if Adam just goes, oh, why did you turn there? He's not, in my mind, that would be him making a statement, which is you took the wrong route. Like you should have gone a different way, right? As opposed to him just genuinely being like, oh, like I didn't know that was a way that you could go.
How did you end up in that spot?
Yeah. And so it can be very difficult, like you're saying, to like have those open and genuine conversations in a way that like, because it doesn't feel opinionated.
It's almost
an
impossible.
Interesting exercise is to like is to given any question you would want to ask somebody, literally any question, think through it in your brain and like think of the different ways you could ask it and notice how you have been trained your whole fucking life to interpret every question
as a statement,
every single one as some kind of.
I think importantly, it's because they are statements. Like they are that what you're detecting there is simply the frame. So if I said like, oh, for example, in this example of you turning, was there construction? If that was the question, right? That's very different than like, why did you turn there?
But that's what I mean. There's not a way for you just to ask the question why.
Yeah, and that's exactly the important. That's the underlying fact,
because then the person wants to know, why are you asking?
Yeah, I don't want to guess
because they're trying to get it. They're trying to get
possible reasons why this happened. I want to basically just say like, hey, that was surprising to me for some reason, so I wanted to know why that happened, right? But there's no way in American English anyway, to convey that question in a way that you can actually trust the other person will believe you, right? We don't have the language for it. We're trained to not,
but I think be able to actually, how to put it, you putting together a question is trying to create some kind of frame so that you can capture some piece of information. But because the information you're trying to get comes from someone else interpreting the frame that you made, there's no guarantee. In fact, it's always wrong. There's always some misalignment between the question you're asking and the way someone receives it and the answer that they're giving. So if you never ask like follow-up questions, if you never go like ask around, build a little net of questions around a thing to figure out what's happening, you're just missing most of the real stuff that's
going on. But this like, yeah, I don't disagree. What I'm saying is this is actually a property of our language and our sort of social construction, right? Given that
it's a property of language, just period, like being person.
Not of language. It's not a property. No, the thing that you're describing is, yes, it's not a property of language that asking somebody why implies you have opinions about it, right? Rather than just asking for an explanation because you want to know, right? That's a property we've bestowed. So like there's a thing that my wife and I differentiate, which is also knowing that there's not an actual like way just to say it, right? Which is, when somebody asks you, hey, do you want X, right? Mm-hmm. Your response options are basically like yes or no, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, pretty unambiguous. The no option could either mean an active not wanting, like I want to not, right?
Correct.
Or it can mean you don't specifically want that. You don't have opinions about it or whatever, right? Right, which is a different kind of a thing, a very different kind of a thing. So like my wife and I differentiate between not wanting and wanting to not when we're trying to decide how we're understanding something. Right?
A lack of desire to do something versus a desire to definitely not do that.
Exactly. because like so it's like, oh, do you want this for dinner? Right. It's like to be able to say like, oh, I don't like actively want that, but that would be fine. Mm-hmm. Rather than just having to say yes, because the only other option is to say no.
I feel like there's like difference between no and nah.
Yeah, but also, but nah is like really dismissive, right? And so, it's this interesting thing about like the language that was available to us to ask questions about this kind of stuff. There's a category of like intention, which is a good faith intention that is missing from at least.
Well, I would actually flip it though. I think a lot of this is a skill in being the receiver of the question. Right, because like you're saying, no matter how you ask a question,
you can only ask. You don't know.
You can only you have to ask it, and if you're receiving a question, if somebody's asking you like, why did you do this way, or why do you like that thing that you like, or whatever, then trying to not react just to the fact that somebody's asking you, and just try to just genuinely answer the question, as if the person is just curious, right? Because there's this weird thing where like you can't really get at their intentions behind the question.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree.
Guess what their intentions
are. The part that I'm annoyed by is that you can't express it. It's literally impossible in the English language.
You can't express your intentions.
Yeah. So what we have to do.
Yeah, it sucks.
What we have to do is try to interpret. Is that if you're then the speaker, then that means that you have to you have to do a dance. Like Sam said, you have to be like, okay, I don't want to imply that I think it's that you did a dumb thing when I say like, why did you turn this way? Right. So
yeah. I mean, the problem is the more
trying to guess how I can construct a series of questions to prevent you from thinking that's what I mean. Cause it's not what I mean. And now you're like navigating this minefield rather than being able just to say like, here's my language construct where I just say like, I put the words in this order and now you know that I'm just honestly asking this question.
But I think this is, to me, it kind of comes down to the basic point, which is like, because you can't know quite what someone means ever. Like at first.
That's true. No, yeah, I agree. People can still, even if there was a language construct, they could still misuse it. Like I don't disagree with that. So it's that there isn't even one is the part that makes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. I think it's a funny fact of, but to me that's just like that's what socializing is to a large degree. But where I personally moved to, that is not getting bent out of shape when people ask me questions. I used to like. There's a period, probably my late 20s, where I was like really annoyed if, let's say, one of our parents asked us about something or like whatever, because I was like, why you ask me for it? It's kind of this like, why would you ask me that question sort of vibe. I'm just
because again, you're not answering the question. You're trying to figure out the intent.
Yes,
now,
exactly.
And then
Because it's not a question. Every question is also not a question. But I think what I've moved to the last couple of years is, in the same way I respond basically whenever someone asks for advice or something like that, is usually my first statement, if I sit down and talk with someone about something and they ask a question, is I have a lot of questions. And then I ask them like just a fucking salvo of questions for like 30, 45 minutes, even like some of these dev calls I've had with people. It's not until the last 10 minutes where I'm like, okay, now given this hour of conversation we've had about questions I have about your question, here's what I think the answer is, or like, here's what I would suggest, And I think that's the thing that I would pass on, which is like, until you're really getting curious about figuring out what other people are even talking about, or really trying to understand, and you can't do it with a question typically, then like I think you're generally just like kind of going to be wasting a lot of energy and or not seeing a lot of the richness of just like the people around you or the life around you. Like you can just, it's weird to me that you can have a conversation with someone about a question they ask, and that conversation can be an hour long, right? Like,
yeah. And it could just keep going.
And it could just keep, there's always more stuff there, right? You could keep on digging in. And that's just crazy to me. We think about that. It's like the fact that when we do this every fucking week on the podcast, we're just talking about a thing, sometimes for like 45 minutes. And every time you turn over another rock, it's like, oh, there might be another 15 minutes there of shit we're talking about.
It is stuff. It is something that is a skill to practice, of like being able to ask those questions in a way that doesn't cause the other person to put their guard up.
Yes, that is true.
Like there are ways to do it with tone and body language and, framing and stuff like that. Like it's always going to be there a little bit. But it is a skill that you can try to like.
Oh yeah, you can get better at it for sure.
I know from my own experience, I mostly, when I want to know why from like people, I actually just don't ask, unless it's in a context where I know that I'm allowed
that they're chill.
Because exactly, which is which I'll say, like, I get why people find themselves becoming like increasingly incurious. And again, like what I'm saying is there's a language construct problem here and a cultural problem here, which is that we've all been trained, and we don't have the language for asking questions in a way that
without judgment.
That is explicitly basically without. But again, that doesn't mean you couldn't use the same question to then be judgmental, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there isn't even a way, because there's not even an opportunity for you to like ask a question so that the other person gets to meet you with the assumption of good faith, right? Because their experience is that every question,
just like social rapport is basically what it comes down to.
And it actually backfires. So if you say like, "Why did you do that?" I'm just genuinely curious. Like that, for some reason, sounds even worse.
I don't understand. That's bad.
I'm just curious. I don't know. Like, why'd you do that?
Yeah, it's a classic leading with genuine question. It's like, this isn't going to be. We all know it's not.
It is true. You could definitely cultivate more of a feel to your conversational tone that doesn't feel that actually just feel more curious and doesn't feel quite as judgmental.
Well, I think it's actually you need that rapport first before you. I think maybe that's like of the things that we're talking about here, of like the question of like the things to invest in, right? It's the idea that like you have to be able to meet people as a person they can. Actually, this goes back to the conversation about like, can you trust a business to invest in it or to buy a product from or whatever? It's all kind of the same thing, right? Which is, if at any point you demonstrate a willingness to basically be a piece of shit in these kinds of contexts, right, and to ask somebody a question like in a very judgmental way and that kind of stuff, right? The moment you've done that once, your motivations become suspect forever. I've experienced this with people asking me questions and stuff, right? So that now I always have to ask questions in my own brain. Now, when that same person I interact with, I'm like, okay, what is the thing beyond the thing?
What are they saying with the question?
Yeah, what are they actually saying?
I gotta say though,
but if you can at least establish yourself as a person who basically means what you say, right? Then that's what allows you to then, in direct rapport with individual people, provide that for them, at least.
And someone who listens.
I am someone you can trust.
Listening is the skill.
Yeah, I think there's one like hack that you can do to try to jumpstart this, which is to do the dog head tilt. So whenever you're asking them a question, be like, so what is this, right? Like if your head is kind of tilted, for some reason it's like it's you basically saying like, I don't fully understand what's happening.
I think people still interpret that.
It's like it's like a listening. But like trying to convey yourself as not like speaking authoritatively, but curiously. Like it's a
yes.
Like I said, there are ways to do it that get better results.
I think as a person who has frankly heard way too many deep dark secrets from strangers in way too short of a time span. Like one of my skills is making people just be chill about stuff, and for some reason just divulge things that they shouldn't really be telling me about because I don't care.
Maybe because you ask questions and not many people have ever asked questions.
What I found generally is like, even when people are initially very defensive about stuff, because to Adam's point, you can never control the response you're going to get to a question,
especially up front.
Yeah. If over even like literally minutes, 2-3 minutes of genuine interest, genuine follow-up questions, where there is that continuous, like essentially non-judgment being practiced there, people actually typically let their guard down like instantly, because the thing is, like, everybody wants to be known.
Everybody wants to be listened to.
And be listened to.
Well, and I think that's actually different.
Don't make it about yourself. Like, right? Because like somebody be like, oh yeah, like tell me about your trip. Like, oh, I went to Hawaii. And you'd be like, oh, I've been to Hawaii. And then you start telling about your trip. It's like, well, now you're just like you're commiserating, right? But like you can
only relate so far by just talking about what you've experienced that's kind of close to that. The best way to actually get someone else to enjoy your company or whatever else is literally just to ask the question or mirror. Just mirror. Simplest thing is mirroring. If they're like, you're saying earlier, the dog-heeled tilt, to me, it's like kind of the equivalent, which is you just say, oh, tell me more about that. Or like, oh yeah, was that, you just like repeat back the thing. And they're like, oh yeah, I went on this trip last Tuesday. You're like, last Tuesday? Literally, that's it. And people interpret it as a invitation.
As an invitation to keep
explain more. And like, again, there's always something. There's always more in there.
And it's not universally true either, right? Because like, I know for me, I start getting weirded out if somebody starts like repeating things to me, because it feels like they like read about what you're supposed to do and they're doing it to me.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you can tell when people are practicing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which doesn't necessarily
versus if they really want to know.
Yeah, it doesn't make me upset necessarily, but it starts to be like,
I get it. Yeah, of course.
It starts to not feel because I actually want to hear from people. This is like no two people are the same, right? Like when I'm talking about something, like I actually do want to hear somebody else like be like share an experience that's similar to mine, because that gives us a place to meet in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Like I don't like when it just feels like it's somebody asking.
You don't want to have an interrogation. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so it's all there's nuance for all of this, right? But still, that fundamental problem is a question of like Sam, like you said, you have to start with the understanding that there's no such thing as a question that is like unambiguous and that doesn't take yourself in to the question and with your interpretation that doesn't include yourself, right? There's no such thing as an unbiased question.
Yeah, and the answer you get is constrained by the question.
Yeah,
right. They are coupled deeply. So like, if you want a different answer, sometimes all you have to do is just ask a different question, which sounds insane, but it's like and dumb. Do you know what I mean? Like,
if you ask it in a different way,
like you could get what you want, but you could just get a different answer by asking a different question. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's another thing that also is just true that there isn't a solution for, which is the whole like my annoyance of they're not.
It's just messy.
Good language constructs, right? Yeah, it just is messy, and there's no way around it being messy. And so the best you do is you learn how with individual people how to navigate the mess, right? But first and foremost, it comes down to you being a curious person who is not judgmental, because if those things are true, so that people can learn to trust you, then everything
and it does
else
come across,
easier.
I think
it does.
Over time. Like it comes, you can't be judgmental and pretend to be curious. Like people sniff that shit out.
Well,
and again, you can't use your words. You can't say, I'm just asking. Like, why did you do that? I'm just
authentically.
There's actually, there isn't a way for you to express it's not possible.
There's no verbal way to do it.
All you can do is demonstrate over time the truth of the claims of your words, right? That's the only thing you can do. And so that's why, like to Seth's like initial premise of like, he comes over to my house and is like, oh, I made my way here, right? We've talked to each other for 100 years, right? So if I'm like, oh, why'd you go that way, right?
I don't care if you ask me that question. It doesn't bother me at all.
The likelihood of him being like, oh, you're like implying something by that is very, very low, right?
Well, but here's the thing.
If a new person came to my house who I didn't know, we had no rapport, and they were coming to my house for like not exactly like a friendly thing. They're coming for some reason, right?
Right.
And I was like, oh, why'd you go that way, right? The chances of them interpreting that badly, the same question, right, in the same tone.
Well, no, there's a difference though. I think it would be interpreted the same way, but the intent behind it would be interpreted differently. So like, if you ask me
that's part of the interpretation. The intent is absolutely. Yeah,
but like if you ask me, why'd you go that way? I would assume that what you're really saying is that there's probably a better way that I could have gone, right? But I'm not. But I won't take that as as like an attack on my intelligence or anything. It's just like you
and also,
opening up the door to
that point. Also, I wouldn't ask that question for exactly that reason, right? Which is that if I thought there was a better way, what I would say instead, which whether or not I should, would be like, oh,
you should.
If you go, I wouldn't say you should. I would just say, oh, if you go this way, like next time, then this way is actually faster or whatever, right? And just get to the fucking point. Right?
Just get to the point instead of asking your way around it. Curiosity. So it's pretty tricky.
That's what you want.
Curiosity.
That's it.
Curiosity.
Well, I guess all three of us have the same answer. Kind of with
non-judgment and curiosity, which are also two sides of the same thing.
Yep.
Which are skills that you have to cultivate, develop, because the world keeps trying to take it away from you. You know,
and no matter how much you do it, you're going to confront stuff where somebody's like says something where you're like, that just sounds. That's like that experience they've described is so foreign to me that I just struggle to believe it could be true, right? No matter how far you go, you're still going to meet that stuff. And it's a conscious effort to be like, okay, I can feel myself accumulating a judgmental attitude, right? Like you can feel it happening and be like, let me just consciously
that's a defense mechanism.
Push that down and try to meet this on like as if it's true. Meet this honestly, right? Meet this non-judgmentally.
It's a defense mechanism.
Well, so that's there to basically say, like, if you talk to somebody who has such a completely different life experience from you, right, where like you just cannot really relate to what it is that they're talking about, right? That in a weird way, that kind of like undermines your own life experience in some cases of like you think you had a lot of things figured out about how the world is or how life is or whatever.
Yeah.
And somebody comes along who's like, no, like it's completely different, right?
Yeah, sometimes then you might be commiserating with someone and you actually don't have any problem overlap, if that makes sense. Like the stuff that you struggle with in life is just not the stuff that they've struggled with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like you're talking about stuff and you're like, what? How?
Yeah. And
like,
so like sometimes you'll come across ideas or life experiences or perspectives that put your own life experiences into question.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the judgment
or the universal truths you thought came from your experiences into question.
Yeah. And so like the judgment that you feel welling up about like, oh, that person's just an idiot, or like that person doesn't know what's going on, or they're just wrong, or they just do, right.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's you trying to protect your own sense of the world and how things are, because it's really uncomfortable to be wrong about stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. It shatters your ego a little bit. And so you also got to kind of recognize that a lot of times that upwelling of judgment is just you being uncomfortable about the fact that you might be wrong about something, which is really just an invitation, like to try to kick that to the curb and start asking questions.
Yep.
You know?
Which, and the key to that is don't think you get to be right about other people's experiences, right? So that's
you don't know.
Curiosity.
Yep. That's it. You've had your life, they've had their life, and both of them happened.
Never the twain shall meet.
Yep. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts as we bear down on the launch.
And check out those new gifts.
Yeah. And check out all those new gifts and stuff. It's pretty cool. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.